Hello, everyone. This is Steve Brule from Studio Brule, and I'm here again live with Janice Fiamengo. She'll be on the screen very shortly. I want to say, sorry, we're not as organized as we thought we'd be this week. We missed the 2 video deadlines that we were going to publish, but I'll say whoops, I've got a feedback here. Okay, here we go. They're both very close to being done, so they both should be done next week, and I hope that I don't prove myself to be a liar this time. Anyways, without further ado, Janice Fiamengo is here, and we've got a couple of topics to discuss tonight. Hi, Janice.
Hey, hi, Steve. At last, we got it working.
Yeah, and we've got both faces on screen, and thanks for the tip from, I don't remember who gave me the tip last week on this StreamYard, but it was fairly easy to get going, and any feedback about the video or audio quality, please feel free to write that in the descriptions too. So Janice, our first topic today, I think we were going to deal with rape in marriage, because that came up last week, and it really is an important issue, because there's some feeling out there, especially among feminists, and I think even non-feminists, there's some belief that rape at some point in history within marriage was legal. And I think that's an enormous distortion of the reality of history. And Janice, do you want to respond to that somewhat? Get us started?
Yeah, well, yeah. And of course, a lot more research can be done on this. And it's one of those things where one just puts out the call. Anybody who has an interest in history, this is, we need so much to have people research the reality of all the complex relations between men and women, because we just don't know enough about history, and therefore we can't understand the present. But yeah, from what I was able to research, the little bit that I did about the 19th century, the situation mainly in Britain and the United States in the 19th century. And I got most of this from an article. Let me see if I can find the article. Now I can't find, oh yes, it's called, it's easy to find. If you go into Google and look at it for an article called, actually a book called Marital Rape by a scholar named Jill Elaine Hastay, Contest and Consent, A Legal History of Marital Rape is the full title. Now this is a feminist analysis. So everything, and that's the case with nearly anything one finds now in mainstream sources or in academic sources. So everything's filtered through a feminist lens. But even so, the point that she makes is that we have this idea that up until 1970, there was never any discussion of rape in marriage, and it was simply accepted that a man could legally rape his wife. That's just the way it was. And as she makes clear, in fact, there was a very robust discussion in the 19th century between feminists and traditionalists, non-feminists, about sexuality within marriage. She's found all sorts of marriage manuals that were very clear that although the category of marital rape did not exist in law, and that was partly because a man and woman were understood to become one person legally in marriage, and there were all sorts of legal obligations that a man had towards his wife. A man could even be held criminally responsible for crimes committed by his wife. He was legally obligated to keep his wife financially, even if she left him and lived apart from him. He could not renege on that responsibility. So there's this whole complex, marriage was this weighty legal concept. So that's why it was understood that a wife gave consent to sexual relations in marriage and could not withdraw that consent legally. But that doesn't mean that it was considered acceptable morally for a man to force himself on his wife. Quite the opposite. And so this feminist scholar has compiled a number of marriage manuals of the second half of the 19th century that all make it very clear that a gentleman, a manly man, was to exercise self-restraint, and that his wife was to be in charge of sexual relations, and that he was never under any circumstances to force himself on her. And what one would need to really look at if one were to do a full study of this is the kinds of social sanctions that existed in a case where a man did rape his wife, and also the kind of legal workarounds that might have been possible. For instance, could a man be?
I think we've lost Janice for a minute there. Are people hearing me? Janice, I just take the opportunity to point out here that what I'm hearing falls into the category of the obvious fact, and I just love this idea from Conan Doyle, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and an obvious fact. And I'd like viewers to consider this because it really applies with feminism in spades. They point out one part of a complex situation, and they make it out to be the entire situation, ignoring the other aspects of it, like you alluded to men's responsibilities within marriage. But having said that, continue on, Janice.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, that it is true that a man could not legally rape his wife. Like, he couldn't be charged and convicted of rape in the 19th century, but it didn't mean that it was considered acceptable in any way. And there's some, again, I'd have to do a lot more research, and it's difficult to do because one needs to go back to the primary documents. But I did find some discussion of the fact that, some legal scholars in the 19th century saying that although marital rape wasn't a thing in law, a man could still be charged and prosecuted for battery, for instance, or indecent assault or some other crime, because certainly crimes against the wife's person were taken very seriously in 19th century British and American and Canadian law. So the idea that's given when feminists say that rape wasn't a crime is that everybody, it was just accepted that men could do it, and that was perfectly satisfactory. But if you read the discussions that were ongoing at the time, it was anything but satisfactory. And what one would need to know would be, what would happen to a man if it became known that he had brutally assaulted his wife? What were the sorts of social sanctions that were in place, and how would he be punished by the community? Because you can bet that he would be punished in cases where it became known. And I think it's also worth saying that the reason that there wasn't such a crime as rape in marriage was because the state believed that what went on in the bedroom between a man and wife was the most personal and private thing there could be. And it was thought that it would be awful for the state to be intervening and using the heavy hand of the law to regulate relations. It was actually thought that this was a way of encouraging men and women, at least men and women of good faith, to work things out for themselves. Now,
interject there. Trudeau, the father of our current idiot child emperor in Canada, once said he wanted to keep the government out of our bedrooms. Mm-hmm. And what is happening today is that the government has never been more intrusive into people's bedrooms than probably any time in history.
Yeah, that's it. And so now we're at the other extreme. And one thing I would say, we now believe that, or at least, our betters, the law believes that a woman not only should be able to charge her husband or long-term intimate partner with rape, but we don't even have any discussion about the inadvisability of making such claims lightly. And I can see that a feminist might say, well, it was poor comfort to a woman in an earlier age to be raped by a brutal husband and to be told that there were social sanctions and moral sanctions widely expressed against such a thing. That didn't help her, in the moment, or didn't help her in her life. But now what we have is a situation where we don't even have social sanctions or any discussion of the morality of women making very casual allegations against their boyfriends or casual friends or indeed husbands. And in fact, we have a push by feminist legal scholars to continually widen the net of what can be considered criminal, even in a long-term consensual sexual relationship. And wow, I mean, the implications for men of what's going on now and the state's involvement in the bedrooms of the nation are indeed really terrifying.
And when you consider the other powers that are given to women outside of the bedroom, the effect, and I think this is worth exploring in some detail, the effect on the psyche of both male and female in an intimate relationship. In effect, a woman today in an intimate relationship has a loaded gun pointed at a man's head, and she just has to say the word, and the trigger will be pulled. Now, in my mind, you cannot have an intimate and close partnership when one partner knows, and you really have to be fairly ignorant about our culture to not know this, when one partner knows that the other partner can say the word and destroy your entire life, every last bit of it, your social life, your reputation in the culture, take away your children, take away your check, your income, take away your house, everything. And it all can be done without evidence on a word of his most intimate partner. Mm-hmm. Now, several things come to mind in that. One, a man has got to be on his guard all the time. So that's not going to be conducive to an intimate relationship. Number two, the famous old saying that power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. Well, women today in the West have absolute power inside the confines of the intimate relationship. Absolute power. Now, would you say I'm exaggerating on that, or what would you say about that comment?
No, absolutely not, Steve. I mean, that's the thing that is so staggering, that we have created a situation of moral hazard for women, I think, where anytime a woman feels angry at her partner or thinks that there's something she wants to get, if there's tension in the relationship, and she knows that an allegation will be treated very seriously, and that the possible blowback to her of a false allegation is almost non-existent. As long as she never admits that it was false, it's very unlikely that she will be prosecuted for making a false allegation. And the possibility that she will be able to get whatever it is that she wants, or merely threaten a man. And I've heard from many, many men who, when their marriages or their long-term relationships were starting to crumble, were threatened in precisely that way. Their wife or girlfriend said, I can make a false charge against you, and I can destroy you if you don't do X or Y for me. And to think that this is the outcome of the so-called noble agitation for the rights of a woman over her own person, which is how 19th century feminists framed their agitation to change the law on marital rape, to think that this is the outcome that has been achieved is, it's really staggering. And you see articles like the one that you posted on Twitter, and I posted it as well, where this is a lawyer talking about, she starts off the article saying that she has prosecuted cases of marital rape that weren't reported until years after the fact. I think that was one of the first things that she mentioned in the article. And right away, wow, what does that even mean? How can you prosecute marital rape? How could you defend yourself as a man against a charge of marital rape years after?
She's talking, that lawyer, and we'll get to this article shortly, folks. I'm going to post that article up on a screen share shortly. But she's talking about coercion alone, and she's equating it. Now, she's not coming out straight using the word rape, but she uses the word sexual aggression. Mm-hmm. But, I mean, that's a euphemism for rape.
Yeah, so exactly.
In other words, she is saying that in essence, that if a man asks a second time for sex, if she agrees, even if think about it, even if she agrees, then the lawyer can then argue that, well, you coerced her. Therefore, in other words, the woman is not allowed to change her mind and say, yeah, I feel in the mood now. Well, I mean,
she can then later say it was coerced.
What's the time period they have to wait? Like, does he have to wait a week before asking again? Can he wait an hour? Is it 10 minutes? Is it a year? They say, dear, do you want to have sex? Oh, well, I'll ask you again next New Year's, okay?
I know. I mean, it's crazy. It's just crazy. I really would encourage anybody watching this to read that article. It's terrifying to me that it's so unclear. I'm not even sure what she's getting at in the course of the writing, because she starts off talking about marital rape. She says she's prosecuted cases. Then she goes on to say, most people would draw a clear line, or would not confuse actual sexual assault in marriage with coercion, which she does not distinguish from just plain old persuasion. So if a husband takes his wife out for dinner and wines and dines her, and they go back home and they've had a wonderful time, and he's given her flowers or whatever, and at the end of the evening he approaches her in the bedroom and she doesn't really feel like it, but she feels that after such a wonderful evening, it would be churlish to refuse him. Most of us would say he's persuaded her, and this lawyer would say that's a kind of coercion. And she then goes on to say that there's no clear line between that, which is now considered a form of sexual aggression, and there's no clear line between that and sexual assault. It all depends on your perception, the woman's perception, presumably.
Let me post the article here now so everyone can see the article we're talking about. Forced intimacy within long-term relationships. And to be clear, this woman has, if you haven't read the article yet, this woman has prosecuted these cases already. Now, she doesn't talk about the outcome of her prosecutions in the article, but we know the direction our culture is going in, and it has been going in for many, many years, and it's going in exactly that direction. That the prosecutions are easier to get on flimsier and flimsier things. Yeah. But I want to make a point before we go off this topic, or I don't know if we're going to go off this topic, but the one point is that if you think of all the divorces out there, and all of the divorces that include accusations of assault, accusations of child abuse, all kinds of accusations, and almost in the vast majority of these cases, these divorces that include these accusations, it's the woman making the accusation against the man. And very, very often, if not the majority of time, there is no evidence. Now, if you can extrapolate that, imagine the iceberg effect. If that many are coming to the surface, imagine how many men are living in a marriage where those threats are understood, or the order of the day, or have been made, or made regularly. I'm going to guess that it's an enormous percentage of intact marriages that other people viewing from the outside would say, well, that's a successful marriage. Well, not so successful if you're living, for the man, if you're living under the threat of absolute destruction, and you're living under the threat. Sorry?
I just lost you for a second there, but it's okay. You're back now.
Yeah, I've lost you at odd time too, and I read somebody saying that they can still hear us. So I think it's maybe one or both of our connections a little bit once in a while. But anyways, I just wanted to make that point, that I think there's an enormous number of men who just living a life of misery under the threat of losing everything. If his wife follows through on the accusations.
Men who may be considering leaving their wives, and then she says to him, if you do, I will make this accusation and you'll never see your children again. And it's terrifying to think that that's not an idle threat. And the other
I've
thing,
made this point a few times on Twitter, and I always get some blowback on that. When the issue of when somebody mentions on Twitter, usually it's a woman saying, "I have a great relationship with my partner, and we're equals," and all the rest of that. And I make the point that you cannot be an equal in a relationship when one has a gun to the other's head.
mm-hmm.
It's impossible.
Even if she doesn't literally have the gun to his head, and I think you made this, it was your metaphor to begin with, the gun is loaded and it's in the bedside table. The woman doesn't even have to take it out. They both know it's there. I mean, you'd have to be stupid, like you said, for the man not to know it's there. Even if he largely 99% trusts that his wife or partner would not use the gun, just knowing that it's there and that only she could use it with impunity, that changes the relationship right there. That's got to do something to the trust. It changes everything.
Logically, it changes both people.
Yeah.
Because the woman knows too.
Sure.
And
yeah.
Like we said a few minutes ago, power corrupts. And
yeah.
She has that power.
Mm-hmm. He doesn't have it, and that's the difference. He has no power in his relationship with her, no personal power, no state sanctioned power. She has it all. And that changes everything. And I mean, and just to go back even to talking about sex itself within marriage or a long-term relationship, although, I think most of us would agree that it's horrible to think of a woman being raped in her marriage and having no recourse. But the idea that you can define rape in the way that we now define it in our society, where it means, non-consensual sex, and then, sex where the woman didn't explicitly say yes, give an affirmative consent. If we take that and then apply that to a marriage, or a long-term relationship, indeed, it's crazy. It means every single person alive who has ever been in any kind of established sexual relationship has committed rape, every man. It means that all sorts of things that are generally accepted as normal, natural, and perfectly non-coercive, such as maybe waking somebody up in the morning by kissing them, fondling them, whatever, all those kinds of things that one would expect are acceptable can be defined after the fact by a vindictive or vengeful spouse as assault. I mean, it's crazy. It's not outside the realm of possibility. And in fact, I even did a video where I talked about a particular feminist lawyer. Her name is Robin West, and I won't go into all the details about it because I talked about it in one of my videos called All Heterosex is Harmful. A woman named Robin West, legal scholar, has theorized that even consensual but unwelcome sex should be, she doesn't actually say maybe that it should be criminalized at this point, but she says we need.
You see the expanding of the net, right?
Mm-hmm.
These nets keep expanding a little by little, and then at first there's some little pushback. Oh, that's a stupid idea, but eventually that stupid idea, feminists seem to be able to get it accepted in our culture. I just want to take a moment to thank some folks here for their donations. We've had several very generous donations come through, starting with, I'm going to miss some of these, I'm sure, someone named AMGX Pat. Thank you very much. And
thank you.
They're some generous donations. Rio Champagne, and excuse me if I miss your name coming through, Ma Lurk. I'm sure some of these names are not, they're screen names for sure.
You think so?
Probably, yeah. Jim Hendricks, thank you very much, Jim. Jim just came in with a very generous donation. And Rico Champagne, I think I might have mentioned that name already. If I missed anybody, I'm terribly sorry, but we do appreciate your generous donations. And our intention is, we were one day delayed on this one. We hope to do them weekly or maybe more. I don't know. I don't want to make any promises because we tend to get behind on schedule, and it's I'm embarrassed about that. We're behind on the 2 videos we hope to get out this week. But thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sorry for interrupting you there, Janice.
Oh, that's okay. And I did want to say thank you for that. This whole thing about marital rape, which was raised last week, and in the moment, I kind of knew something about it. I remembered Karen Strawn talking about it, but it wasn't something that I'd been recently reading about or anything. And so I started to do a little research, and it really is so fascinating. And it's so fascinating to trace how we got from there, 100 years and more ago, and the kinds of discussions that were ongoing then, and the law as it existed, and to where we are now, where, you actually have legal scholars suggesting that the law should take into account the harms to women of what this woman, Robin West, called consensual but unwelcome sex. She's not talking about criminalizing it yet, but you can imagine, as you say, Steve, that's what she's got in mind down the road, that a woman can say, look, I did consent, but I didn't want it. And
I think
over the years, it hurt me.
Sorry to keep interrupting you there, Janice. Sorry. I get these things burning in my head, and sometimes I feel like I've got to blurt it out because these topics just they boil my blood, oh crap! And now I've forgotten what I was going to say.
Yeah, that's what happens.
Sorry, folks.
It'll come back, I'm sure. But yeah,
I'm going to put this one question up because on that topic, someone was saying Jordan Peterson downplays the risks, and I had this up here, and there's a way to show these things on here. Sorry, I'm slowing things down, but I'm trying to figure out this technology at the same time. There's a way to put a question up here or a comment up on the screen for everybody to see. And there's lots of good comments coming through, and I want to just figure out how to get this up here. Right ideas, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, oh, crap. Now I can't find it. But anyways, someone says that Jordan Peterson seems to downplay the risks that facing young men. But I would say completely the opposite. Like, the risks facing young men are enormous. They're rolling the dice with their entire future in relationships with women. I mean, what do you think about that, Janice? Have you heard Jordan Peterson downplaying the risks facing young men in relationships with women?
Well, I'm not sure that that's his primary concern. I saw a clip where he was talking about the inadequacy of the idea of consent, as a way to govern sexual relations. And his point, I think, was that in a society that makes marriage sacred and that makes the bond between one man and one woman sacred, that would be such an entirely different society that you wouldn't have the kind of often sort of frivolous seeming discussions about whether you've got consent or not that we now find in feminist and even non-feminist circles. And I thought that was actually a really good point. I can't imagine now how we might go back to that, but that's probably the standard that many people think that we should assert, that we have to again affirm the commitment between one man and one woman. But I can't imagine what that's going to look like when you have the notion that even in a long-term marriage, even in a long-term monogamous relationship, that a man can be charged with sexual assault. So yeah, in that sense, perhaps that isn't something that Professor Peterson really emphasizes.
I'd like to throw a comment in here, and I think this is pretty common with men, but men never say this, okay? I've had sex a lot of times when I didn't really want to because my partner at the time really wanted to. This has happened. This happens, and then folks, you can, guys, you can make comments in there. Have you had sex with your partner when you really didn't feel like it, but she really wanted to, so you figured, you're in an intimate relationship, you can make it work. It's not like it's going to kill you or anything. But on the flip side, with women today, it's like, oh, we've destroyed their entire moral framework. They can never be the same again because they had sex and they weren't really, truly horny.
Yeah. That true. Yeah, that too. I mean, that's what I thought when I was reading that article by Robin West talking about the harms. She talked about it like she used Marx's idea of alienated labor when as the framework to talk about a woman who is in a long-term relationship having sex that she doesn't really want to have, that's unwelcome, yet that she consents to, that it damages her in her person in some kind of really profound way. And part of me thought, well, is it really, like, can you really make that sort of comparison? I can see if you hated your partner, but
they're taking away the woman's agency too when they say that it damages her. She made a decision, and she can say, let's stop. I don't really want to do this. She can do that at any time doing it, and I could too. And I'll tell you this: I've got through those times when I really didn't feel like it, and it didn't damage me. And I don't believe that I'm any stronger than psychologically stronger. I'm physically stronger than the average woman, but I'm not any stronger psychically than the average woman. I may be even weaker than the average woman psychically. But the reality is, complying to the needs or wants of your partner at the time doesn't hurt you.
It's not I would think that in any decent, healthy relationship, it wouldn't be damaging at all. But that's part of the feminist modus operandi, is to describe sex in these ways. Feminists have been doing this for at least 50 years, maybe for much longer, describing sex as something that is harmful, fundamentally harmful, but only to the woman. Never, even though the Center for Disease Control survey, when it asked the question of men, whether they too had been forced to penetrate, found that the numbers of men saying that they had that same experience that women describe as rape, the numbers were comparable. Yet our society in general doesn't care about harms to men, doesn't believe that men can be damaged by heterosexual sex. So yeah, it's just there's this entire narrative that has been created that encourages women to understand sexuality as something that for the most part is dirty, demeaning, disgusting, and damaging to them, in their most intimate recesses of their soul.
And I just put up this comment by Magnus here because it references to my comment. Everybody likes ice cream, It's like saying everybody likes ice cream. Of course, yeah. I mean, but you don't always feel like it. And I'd say, yeah. I mean, I like sex. But I don't always like sex, and sometimes you're just not in the mood. And I like ice cream, but sometimes I'd rather have a steak. Or I'm full. I'm full. I'd rather go to bed because my belly's full. I don't know.
I mean, I just think that we've lost the ability to actually have adult conversations about what is owed to one's partner in a loving relationship. And the feminist narrative has so completely taken that over and has insisted to generations of women now that the most damaging thing of all is to have non-consensual sex. This is something for which a man should be punished by going to prison for a long time. We're talking about how people's psyches are damaged in relationships. I think one can make a good argument that has also damaged generations of women in their attitudes toward sexuality within marriage or within a long-term relationship, or even in a short-term relationship for that matter. I mean, the feminist message to women is so messed up. On the one hand, it is that women are just like men and, should have sex with abandon and there doesn't need to be any kind of emotional commitment. They can just enjoy it. It's sort of like, going out for a jog. It's a lot of fun. I guess some women do feel that way, but I think a lot of women don't actually feel that way, but they're encouraged by feminists to believe that. And then when they feel bad about a one-night stand or a hookup when they were drinking with somebody that they barely knew, when they afterwards feel wounded by that because it seems like the guy isn't really interested in them, or they feel that it was a tawdry evening that they spent, then they turn that into a charge of sexual assault. I think that often is what happens. And then feminists say that they have to be believed, even if they're sort of retroactively withdrawing consent or saying that they couldn't consent because they were drinking. So feminists have created a situation in which, or the feminist narrative have created a situation in which women, end up being hurt and then hurting men, with the weapons that feminist law and feminist societal attitudes has given them. So it's a real mess.
Yeah, definitely. So we got another great donation from Jim Hendricks. Thank you very much, Jim. And thank you everyone for the donations coming in here. We really do need it. And we've got a lot of ambitious goals, and we hope to get to those goals. And some of that is going to take some fundraising for sure.
And so, Steve, maybe we should start winding this down, and you should tell us when your hour-long sort of mini documentary about some of the origins of feminism and some of the realities of female power in the decades, or not just the decades, the centuries before feminism. When is that mini documentary going to be ready for us?
Well, I've got the second cut done, second go through it done today. So I've got to go through and check out little things like the sharpness of the videos and the color and the cut points and stuff like that. So next week for sure.
Good for
Absolutely
you.
For sure. And it is a long one. I warn folks, it's 55 minutes long. And in my experience of going through researching this, is that this is a deep topic. Mm-hmm. And I mean, don't think that I've thoroughly covered it at all. What I'm doing is introducing the topic. I consider this to be a light brushing over the history to try and get an explanation as to why in 1848 did feminism suddenly take off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Previously, and what that really means, and what was the psychic motives behind it, and the psychic support behind it. So I hope folks watch it through, because I'll give you this little warning: the best part is the last third, but don't skip the first 2/3.
Well, from what I remember of the script, it was really interesting, and I look forward to seeing what you've done with it. And I'm working on something too, and this is also, it's sort of a new area in a way, and it's something that Steve and I have talked about. We've talked about gynocentrism for a long time. Lots of men's advocates and critics of feminism have talked about gynocentrism. And what I started to think as I was writing the latest video that I hope will be out sometime next week, which it's so far tentatively titled "The Women Are Wonderful Effect." And it's about the difficulty that our culture has, what I think now is an unprecedented difficulty that our culture has with facing the reality of female evil, or if evil is too strong a word, or just of women having bad motives, being fully capable as men of aggression, violence, and cruelty. And I started to think that this is something much more than gynocentrism, because it seems to be that many societies before ours have been gynocentric, but have also been very keen, actually, to distinguish between female goodness and female badness or evil. And most traditional societies have a very clear delineation of what a good woman is versus what a bad woman is, and that's been necessary.
Our society did too. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In the 19th century, you could say that British or Anglophone society was a very gynocentric society already, but it definitely had a clear sense of what a good woman was and what a woman might do to put herself out of that category where she was no longer had full access to all the protections that a good woman had, for instance. Now it seems to me that I think we've almost completely lost that. And every woman, no matter how heinous her crimes, is conceived to be a good woman turned bad, but always turned bad by victimization. Over and over again when you...
There's a justification.
Yeah,
right?
There's always some kind of justification. In fact, we have moved now to keep almost all women out of prison, usually through the justification that women only do bad things because they've been victimized, because in some way a man is responsible. You never hear that kind of rationale used. You never hear arguments about keeping most men out of prison on the rationale that, you know, most men are turned bad rather than being born bad. But that's the kind of rationale that's used when you hear prison reform advocates talking about keeping women out of prison. So it does seem to me that maybe there is something unprecedented in our cultural moment now in our inability to actually define, what female evil looks like, and to figure out structures to control it, which was what all former societies always did. And I'm not sure I'm right about that, but it just kind of sort of an interesting, it's sort of an obvious point maybe, but it just new to me. Even though I've been
thinking away your whole video, because this is central to your next
yeah.
It's a central topic. So this is a really interesting one, and Janice and I have spoken about this several times.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you alluded to it, is the difficulty of seeing the dark side of a female nature in our culture. There's a extraordinarily reluctance to see or admit that there is a dark side to female nature.
Yeah.
But this is all our literature, all religious traditional scriptures of most major religions, I think, they deal with the dark side of female nature in their parables, in their stories. In Greek mythology, there's a whole host of terribly bad women, from Medusa to that other one who kills her kids, Medea. Tons of them.
Yeah.
But in our culture, suddenly, it's like we don't have any literature to draw on to discuss this, and maybe that's why feminists have been referring to all old literature as the lies of old white men, because
that's it.
They want to erase the record of female dark side.
That's part of it, and certainly now anyone who does try to present the reality of female evil is called a misogynist, and even though we fully recognize that men have the capacity to do terrible things too. It's quite, and you know what, the other thing that it struck me about this is that it isn't even, like, in a way, the inability or unwillingness to recognize female evil is even stronger than the desire actually to protect women and girls, which you would think would be paramount. You sent me an article, Steve, last week. It was an Ottawa judge who refused to give the mandatory minimum sentence to two women who had been pimping out young girls. They had been caught pimping a 14-year-old and 15-year-old girls who were runaways, very vulnerable girls. They were forcing them into the sex trade. You would think that there would be outrage at the despoliation of innocence in that case, and yet the judge was more concerned about the women who had who'd done this terrible thing than about the girls who had been victimized.
And these two women got no prison time. And the judge rationalized it by saying that they didn't actually get to the point of selling the girls' bodies for sex. They only didn't get to that point because they were caught before they
were caught. Yeah, it wasn't like they backed out. You know, they didn't have a change of heart. They were caught. They were going to fully exploit these young girls in the most horrific way. And yet he felt sorry for them. He talked about them as victims and as women who were turning their lives around. But I mean, it was really astounding. One of them got no jail time. The other had been in jail waiting for the trial, but that she got time served, so she didn't have to spend any more, and the other got a suspended sentence. So yeah, there it seemed that the denial of female evil actually overrode the desire to actually punish those who harm young women. So it's amazing, really. I'm
looking for that article as we speak here because I remember it quite well. And I don't remember where I posted it. I posted it somewhere, maybe Facebook, maybe Twitter. I can't remember now.
I can put it up on Twitter if anyone wants. Anyway, it'll be it's in one of the cases, one of the legal cases discussed in my video. So anybody who's interested can
Terrific.
Can soon see it. I'll post it. I might have posted it on Twitter too. It's astounding. Anyway, well, we should probably end.
Wrap it up.
Yeah.
We could go on 24/7 with these topics because there is just an infinity of nonsense coming through our culture on a daily basis.
Yeah.
So I want to thank everyone for watching us, for joining us today. I'm sorry I didn't get to as many comments as I could, and I'm still learning this live stream, and I don't know how to take the comment off the last comment off the screen here. So but thank you, folks, and in the future, I'm going to try and get more responses to comments that actually come up on the screen as we go. And thanks once again. We've got another donation coming in from Joseph Massey. Thank you very much, Joseph.
Joe. Hi, Joe.
We really appreciate the donations, especially as YouTube puts the noose around our bank accounts here and squeezes like there's no tomorrow. So
thank you, everyone.
Thanks again for joining us. Thank you, Janice. And join us next week. We're going to try and get these going on basically a weekly basis. I hope at the minimum, but I'm as bad as anybody else as missing my deadlines. Both the new videos are coming out this week. I promise that. Right now.
Okay.
your script is ready. I know that. My video is almost totally done. So I'm pretty sure at least one. Also, I'll promise this. At least one video is coming out in less than a week before next Friday, and we'll talk about at least one of those in the next live stream, and we'll try to take questions that audience that viewers might have about those whichever the videos that we do talk about.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.